Welcome to This Song Is Yours, the podcast where we dive deep into the art of songwriting, chat with some of the most exciting artists in the world, and explore the stories behind their songs. I am your host, Simon Fink, and as always, thank you very much for joining us. Our guest this week on the podcast is Benjamin Gibbard. As the frontman and primary songwriter of Death Cab for Cutie, Ben has spent the better part of 30 years crafting some of the most emotionally resonant indie rock of his generation, earning multiple Grammy nominations, platinum-selling albums, and a devoted global fan base that has only grown with time. Death Cab crossed from indie darlings into the mainstream in the mid-2000s, aided in no small part by a certain Seth Cohen, and have never looked back since, continuing to make melodic, deeply felt rock music that connects in a way few bands managed to sustain across 3 decades. Alongside Death Cab, Ben has also found widespread acclaim with the Postal Service, whose debut and solo album, Give Up, has long since earned its place as a modern classic. Last week, however, saw Death Cab for Cutie release I Built You a Tower, their 11th studio album and their first on an indie label in 20 years. And I have to admit, it is something truly special. Today, we are sitting down with my personal songwriting hero, Benjamin Gibbard, to talk about what it means to return to an indie label after 2 decades and how that shaped the making of I Built You a Tower. We discuss the sonic ambition of the record and how it draws together everything Death Cab have built across their career up until this point. We get into the songwriting process behind some of these new songs and also discuss Ben's influence on a generation of younger writers who grew up with his music. We then have a look ahead to their forthcoming Australian tour in November, which, if you haven't already sorted your tickets, I would strongly suggest that you do. Now, we want to say a massive thank you to Dave for his help with today's episode and give you a very friendly reminder that I Built You a Tower is out right now. You'll find links within today's show notes on where you can buy the record and purchase tickets to their Australian tour in November. While you are in the show notes, please make sure you subscribe to This Song Is Yours and come follow us on Instagram and on TikTok. It genuinely does help us out and it keeps you across new episodes, guests, and everything else that we have coming up. We've also got our playlist feature on our website where we also have brand new merch in the form of tote bags. So please hit up thissongisyours.com for everything related to the podcast. But let's not keep you any further. Here is our conversation with Benjamin Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie.
All we seen me was punching the flowers, ruminating like a fatalist for hours, with a voice like the sound of slamming doors, in a voice like the sound of slamming doors. All we seen me was punching the flowers.
Please welcome to This Song Is Yours, Benjamin Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie. Ben, hello, sir. How's it going?
It is going well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time in what I imagine is probably an extremely, taxing, busy, overwhelming time in the life of yourself. There's a brand new Death Cab for Cutie record that is out right now in the form of I Built You a Tower. Firstly, congratulations on this record. How are you feeling with it now being out?
I am relieved to finally have it out and to be letting the record speak for itself, let's say. I feel whenever I start talking about a record and doing press on a record that's not in the world yet, I fear that, that I might be speaking it up too much, sort of, I mean, I know my job is to promote our music, but I really feel much better when the music is out in the world and people can make up their own opinions about it. And if they listen to this podcast, they can go and listen to the record or vice versa and gain some insight rather than be listening to me talk about songs that they haven't heard yet or might not hear for a couple weeks,
I very much appreciate that. Sometimes it feels like you're almost talking to a very limited crowd when you're doing it beforehand, post, like once it's out and people have had a chance to absorb these songs and listen to the record.
Exactly, yeah. And as is always the case, when we begin these press kind of blasts, I'm also learning how to talk about the record, which is something I feel I'm able to do much better now than I was a couple months ago. So, I'm glad you're catching me now.
Look, that's also totally fair. This is the 11th studio record from the band, and it's also exciting because it's the first one back on an indie label. You guys are now signed to Anti Records after a number of years on a major label, and obviously, as anyone who would be across your music knows, that Death Cab, Postal Service, other projects you've been involved in, you're not new to putting out music, but does this one going back onto an indie label, does it feel any different in terms of some of those previous ones? Is there a different feeling approaching the release of the record?
We were on a major label for 20 years. And in that time, we were never interfered with by anybody at Atlantic Records. We had a very different experience at a major label than most artists or bands from our general world have had. But I will say, I only in recent months have realized that, so much of the campaign for a record on Atlantic Records or on a major label for that matter was predicated upon the radio campaign. And, while we were always making records with the intent of making a great record, there always had to be a song, a single, a song that could be played on the radio. And, it was never as if I was going into my studio to write music and thinking like, I really have to write a single, or I'm going to write a single today. But I do think that because that was such an important part of the campaign, and because major labels tend to be focused more on the single than the album, and that's not a slight to anybody at Atlantic, but just the reality of how the model works.
Of course,
that there was a little more pressure on that side of it. Having said that, I think there are many more catchy songs that could be singles on this record on an independent label than there were on the last one. So there's that, and then one thing that I've has been really refreshing and to return home to, so to speak, is that we're back on a record label run by people who were in or are in bands, and not people who were in the music industry, if that makes sense. It's refreshing to kind of go into a conference room with in our first meeting with Anti and end up just talking about music, not our music, but just what we're listening to and the things we're into, and a lot of that music is obscure, or it's not even guitar based music. It's Mal Waldron or something like that, and having the people around the table be like, oh yeah, well I have this great Mal. Yeah, do you know this Mal Waldron record he made with Steve Lacy? There were some people at Atlantic Records who certainly could do that. I mean, Craig Kalman was very knowledgeable. Steve Rabowski, who was our A&R for the last couple of records there, was a really knowledgeable guy. But it just feels great to be back amongst people who more or less have our record collections. If that makes sense.
100%. I feel like it's easy to put out art and music if you're not necessarily aligning yourself with, but if the team that you have around you is like-minded in that sense as well, that they know the both sides of the coin. Whereas, again, no disrespect to Atlantic, there might be more of a commercial or corporate focus while still being music fans. But it is terribly exciting that this record, you kind of phrased it as in like a return to home before, and I think that might apply to the sonics across this record. I felt that being lucky enough to have a listen to it before it has come out and we're chatting, that it's this beautiful amalgamation of your career and of Death Cab so far up until this point. I felt that what was it, opening track, Full of Stars, I felt could have really just slotted in anywhere on Former Lives, that solo record of yours. And Punching the Flowers gave like very photo album era kind of Death Cab. When you went into this process, or I guess any process for a Death Cab record, is there ever a sense of not necessarily a nostalgic lens or looking for ideas, but is there ever looking back on what the band has achieved and what you've already done, and does that play into how you then create that new forthcoming record?
Well, I think that the constant forge and the tightrope walk of any career artist or band, or someone who's had a long career, I should say, is to recognize what you're good at and what makes your work resonate, and what makes, because those things tend to be the same thing. What you're good at and what resonates tend to be the same things, while also trying to push forward and experiment and try new things. And I think over the course of our discography, there have been moments that we have done that well. We have found that balance, and other moments maybe we haven't. But I think at the end of the day, I found myself realizing that so much of the reason that the middle period of the band, let's say, I mean, everything that's kind of like Codes and Keys through, Thank You for Today. There's a lot, I kind of see the eras of the band in like 2 or 3 record kind of blocks,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an interesting block because, for many reasons, but, I had really gotten away from a process of songwriting that was a huge part of what made the sound of the band unique in the early days of the band, which was when I was first writing songs for Death Cab. I would think of these. I would put these songs together starting with myself playing drums, and I would play kind of like a hook, what I considered like a hooky drum part of some sort. Like something on We Have the Facts, and be like boom, bop, bop, boom, bop, bop, boom, boom, bop, bop. You could hear it and know what song it was if you were a fan of the band, right? And then that would inform the guitar work. And then if I threw a bass on it, I would want the bass to play against what the guitar was doing. And so much of my favorite material that we've made has, in the first 3 or 4 albums, came out of that process. And when I moved away from recording on a 4-track and got into more digital recording, Pro Tools and whatnot, I was using drum machines, and I had a big folder on my laptop of all these like drum loops from old soul records and stuff, and drum breaks, and I was cutting up found sounds and writing to those, and I got some great songs out of that, but I really just wanted to get back to the simplicity of just the sound of the process of, I wanted to get back to the simplicity of the process of making those early records, where you just had these 3 or 4 elements: guitar, bass, drums, vocals, and wanting everything to be signature and kind of dope, and then from there, if it required extra adornment the band would do that. But, one of the many reasons for this record only took us 3.5 weeks to make is because the songs came in. Mm-hmm. And everybody had a lane. It wasn't, in that period of Codes and Keys through Thank You for Today, there was a lot of like me bringing in these less arranged songs, and then us all trying to find what we were playing like in the studio. And that made the records drag on. And, we got into a lot of studio trickery and further away from a style of arranging and making songs that had been so signature to the band in the early days, which is the stuff I love the most. So I wanted to start from a similar process, hopefully with the knowledge that I've been writing songs for 30 years, and hopefully I'm better at it now. Mm-hmm. And that I could start from a similar place, but I wouldn't end up at We Have the Facts. I would end up at I Built You a Tower.
Yes. Okay. That, which like kind of makes sense. I think that there is this beautiful, maybe synchronicity isn't the right word, but like across the record, it feels like this is Death Cab really clicking in once again. And you mentioned just then, obviously, a very lengthy career in songwriting with bands that have had quite a bit of influence across, I want to say, indie rock and the musical landscape as a whole. And I'm not simply just trying to be complimentary because we're, chatting with one another today, but I feel that many young songwriters cite both Death Cab, Postal Service, other projects we've been involved with as a touchstone for them getting involved in music as well. Is there, what's the word? I'm curious, does legacy ever play into it when you're creating, if that makes sense? Like how you're perceived in the career of one Mr. Ben Gibbard, like does that play into when you're creating and making music, then what's going to be output on that next record?
Not particularly, in the sense that I just like being in this little room that I'm in talking to you right now. It's, it's like a 10 by 10 little bedroom in my house, and I've got keyboards and a piano and my little recording set up, and I just love the process of working on music and discovering, discovering songs. It's like I feel like I sometimes refer to my partner like I'm going into the song mines for the day. I'm going to go and just and using this relatively simple instrument set and trying to find new ways to express myself. With as I am writing more and more and kind of creatively painting myself into a smaller corner and finding out how to use that small amount of real estate to make things that feel new and are exciting to me primarily, and then hopefully by extension the band and the fans of the band. And I also just, final point on it. I also just, it's not so much that I think about the legacy, but I'm first and foremost a music fan. Mm-hmm. And when I think about my favorite bands and the kind of careers they had and the things I wish they would have done at certain crossroads, I kind of make note of those things and try not to fall into some of the same trappings that I see some of my favorite bands falling in as they get older.
Mm-hmm. That's an incredibly important thing to kind of note. I think that a lot of people that we speak to, as you probably would have picked up on by now, Ben, we are primarily a songwriting podcast, that there's a lot of people who kind of talk about starting to write and in that process of how they go through. And it's really interesting that you mentioned tracking and kind of seeing those crossroads and where people succeed or where maybe it hasn't worked as well as they thought. I was wondering whether you might go back and, for a number of our listeners, just give us that introduction, talking about, the bands that you loved and got you into music. Where did that songwriting passion for you start? What was it that kind of made you think, yeah, this is something that I want to possibly do myself and can get involved with?
I think probably the first group that I truly fell in love with, or the first two groups I fell in love with, were REM and The Cure. Mm-hmm. And, this is like late 80s. I'm probably 13 or 14 years old. And it's funny because, when I say this, I know I'm going to sound like a hipster asshole, but it was only because whomever's older brother had ripped a copy of Chronic Town that, aside from the songs on the radio, which at that point were probably The End of the World as We Know It, might have been on the radio, maybe Stand, I don't know. But the Chronic Town was the first release that I heard from REM, and it's just the EP. And, it's the late 80s. MTV is serving up, just bucket after bucket of, hair metal slop. And, I'm starting to feel like maybe I can't do music because I can't play guitar like that. Or because that's, when you're a kid, you don't realize until somebody shows you there's another way, you don't realize there's another way.
Yeah.
And I was just so drawn to REM and I believe it was probably The Cure's Disintegration was the first proper record I heard by them that it just made my heart swoon. And to this day, it makes me feel that way. And as I moved from the Washington D.C. area, my dad was in the military, and we ended up moving back to Bremerton, Washington, where I was born. And I kind of fell in high school with a bunch of kids who were listening to a lot of underground, punk rock stuff, but also a lot of bands that were active in the region that were, indie, proto indie rock bands in the Northwest, bands like Tree People. Tree People was the band that Doug Marsh was in before he started Built to Spill. I remember hearing the song Liquid Boy on the radio on the local show when I was, 15 or 16. And, it starts with this kind of these dueling kind of guitars doing kind of like a Jay Mascis-y kind of solo thing. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And Doug's voice comes in, and it was this kind of aha moment where, my singing voice, at least at that point, was also kind of small and reedy. And I just didn't think I had a voice to be a singer. But then hearing Doug sing the song that to this day is one of my favorite tunes and one of these like really important songs to me, gave me a confidence. I mean, Mac McCon from Superchunk, similar. Superchunk was an incredibly important band to me. So it became this kind of amalgam of, some larger bands like The Cure and R.E.M., but also a lot of, indie, early 90s, like indie rock stuff that's happening in the region and also around the country.
I think that you'll find a lot of artists that we've spoken to of like a similar age have said similar things in terms of the music that they've found have been handed to them by someone close, or that it hasn't necessarily been what is in that mainstream at the time, but what has kind of come from almost the sidelines in a way. And obviously, as we progress through history, that becomes different with social media and everything else.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether there's something that you've found in your own songwriting journey that you would maybe say is your strength, maybe is like, the Ben Gibbard trick, or is, it's the strongest weapon in your tool belt. And then whether there's anything, when it does come to songwriting, that even 30 years on, you continuously want to improve, that there's something that you can see that it always has like a room to grow, I guess.
At the end of the day, a song is only as good as the lyrics, I feel. Mm-hmm. And the songs that I've written that I'm the most proud of are the songs that are the most visual and, maybe, the word cinematic gets thrown around a lot. I think it's a little bit of a tired word, but they're very visual, and I remember in kind of a flurry writing the song Company Calls Epilogue on our second record. And I finished it, and, I was so proud of it. And I felt like at the time, that was the best song I'd written to that point. To me, it kind of became not so much a template for what I wanted to do, but it was, I realized that this is the kind of songwriting I wanted to do. The first record is a lot of very obscure, kind of like veiled, lyrics, and it's a little obtuse. But when I wrote We Are the Facts and We're Voting, when I wrote Company Calls Epilogue, I felt that I was starting to really hit on something. And for me, songs need to be about something. Mm-hmm. And I just loathe songs that use tired language and tropes and I'm obviously not going to name any right now, but it's like, but there's a lot of songs that are very popular right now by, kind of so-called confessional songwriters that are just so horribly written, and they're so boring. And to me, the most important element of my songwriting, I've always felt, are the lyrics and the storytelling, and trying to make something really captivatingly visual. I mean, one of the brilliant songwriters of our relative generation is John Darnielle from Mountain Goats. I mean, he, with the Mountain Goats, it's not so much that the music is secondary. I wouldn't want to, because that could be taken the wrong way if I said that, but more so that it's all about the stories. It's all about the lyrics, and the music serve in so many cases. I feel like the music in the Mountain Goats is serving the narrative.
100%. I think that there is something incredibly special about the career that you have built with Death Cab in terms of balancing this beautiful. It's like a balance between like literary, but also not anything that is too. And this is no disrespect to either of these bands. As you just mentioned, the Mountain Goats, I would almost place the Decemberists as well. And this is, as a compliment to them, but sometimes the lyrics being too literary. I think Death Cab has always done a beautiful job of creating a visual picture with the words, but not necessarily alienating anyone, or it's still been quite open for interpretation for quite a broad audience, which I think is a really special thing that not all songwriters can do. So I think it is a testament to yourself for across those records. As you said, we have The Facts from Photo Album, Plans, Transatlanticism, Narrow Stairs, all of the records that it's been something that has been done incredibly well by yourself, Ben. You are visiting us down here in Australia in November. Terribly exciting. There's, I think, 7 years between drinks, which looking forward to being able to catch you on these run of shows. Aware that you would have been touring the record a little bit by that stage. How are you finding the process of fitting in these new songs alongside that catalogue that we just discussed? Kind of, the fan favourites, the hits that you almost have to play. How are you finding that that kind of fun balance of playing the new songs amongst the older?
Well, we've only played kind of half a show so far with some new material. But when we were kind of putting this stuff together, making demos and, recording it, the music came together so effortlessly, I think, because the record is spiritually already in our hands, if that makes sense. I mean, everybody who's a member of this band knows how to play all these songs from the catalog, and I feel that these songs slot really well along those songs. This feels like, I guess any record we say, we slap the name Death Cab for Cutie on it is technically a Death Cab for Cutie record, but I mean, this record just really feels like a Death Cab record, and that's been something that some friends of mine who've heard the record have said, and they've meant it as a compliment. And I feel it's the same way. We played a show a couple weeks ago, and it was the first time we were playing any of these songs for people who had not heard them. And, we'd go from something like New Year into Punching the Flowers, and it didn't feel awkward. It didn't feel like we were hitting a speed bump, as it often is when we're playing new material. And certainly material, in this period between, Codes and Keys and Thank You for Today, where there's it's denser and there's more stuff going on, and we're, relying on some tracks, and it's kind of a lot of stuff going on. And this just feels, by design, I much more stripped down. And I at some point when I was working on songs for the record, and I fired off a text on the band thread and just said something like, hey, we're not going to get mired in overdub world on this record. I'm not going to allow it. Like I don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to double that guitar part with a dulcimer and a synth. Let's just go in and play this stuff. And if it sounds cool, it sounds cool. And I don't know. It feels, if the success of this most recent Geese record is any indication, it's very clear that a lot of people who consider themselves, guitar music fans, rock music, indie rock, whatever, that the listeners really don't want more stuff in the recordings. I mean, there's a reason that we keep going back to these Rolling Stones records or Led Zeppelin records. The reason that Marquee Moon still sounds amazing, 50 years later. And no one is like, man, I really wish Marquee Moon had some more samples in it. No one's saying this. It's the records that are the tentpole records in our culture are such because they feel like they were played by human beings.
Yes.
And I think that that was something going into this record that we were very aware of wanting to preserve.
I think that's a very smart move from yourselves, and I think it's almost indicative. Yeah, it's the way that rock music, and I know that this is almost like a cyclical conversation when it says, is rock music back, or things like that. Geese has definitely inspired that, but I think that there is truth to what you said, where people want to just be able to connect with the music. You don't need samples, you don't need other things like that. It's probably why television doesn't hit so hard on TikTok. Well, maybe not yet. Who knows? It might have its moment.
Right. Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
One track I did want to very quickly discuss on the record, it did have classic nature of Death Cab songwriting, with these kind of like two different, or possibly three or four, you might tell me, different guitars interplayed with one another across the song kind of builds. It was Stone Over Water, which is, I think, midway on the record. Wondering if you might be able to talk to us about the creation of that song, or where it kind of was inspired from and how it came to be on the record?
Yeah, so at some point, I have an arrangement with Fender Guitars. We did a signature Mustang some years back, and I found myself in possession of a bass six, which, for those who might not be familiar or listening, it's strung like a guitar, but it's an octave down. And I was at home doing my work, and wrote this song called Stone Over Water, and it ended up in a Dropbox with the other 80 or 90 songs that had kind of piled up over the course of the last 4 years. And in early 2025, the band got together virtually and went through all of our favorite songs, and we made an A list and a B list and kind of a C list that was like, maybe there's something there. And Stone Over Water was not on any of those lists for any of us. Not a single one of us had Stone Over Water on that list. And at some point, before we were going in the studio with John, he said, I told him, we got like 90 songs. You don't want to hear all these songs. He's like, no, send them all over. And I'm like, okay, sure. So, and I think there's no way this guy's busier than, he's so busy. There's no way he's going to listen to everything. And we get in the studio the first week, and he's like, look, none of you guys had the song Stone Over Water on the list, but I think we should do it. And we were like, and we all kind of looked at each other like, what? Stone Over Water? It's like, yeah, no, that song's really important. We need to record it. And I think at the time I was assuming that this was some kind of misdirection campaign he was doing, where he was like, we were obsessed with these 14 or 15 songs we wanted to record for the record. And, maybe, we've done this before. You pick a song that is not going to be on the record, and you do it first so everybody can kind of get their bearings in the studio. You can get sounds, and no one's too precious about it. Mm-hmm. And so I assumed this must be one of those things. We end up working on these 2 or 3 songs that everybody's too excited about, and then we're gonna do Stone Over Water as like a palate cleanser before we really record the record, and we start working on the song, and we realize man, that doesn't sound really good, and we keep adding to it, and I'm playing the bass six. Dave is doing some cool arpeggio stuff. We're using this kind of drum machine through an amp. And it feels kind of minimal, and then kind of builds towards the end. And at some point we're in the studio just listening to playback, and I turned to John. I'm like, man, this sounds fucking amazing. And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm good at my job. It's like he was like acknowledging yeah, how do you think I became John Congleton? And and on numerous occasions since I've thanked him for pulling that song off of out of the pile, because we would not have chosen to record it, and it feels like a really important in its placement in the record. It really provides an important emotional touchstone midway through the record, and I thought the lyrics were okay, but they weren't anything that I thought was overly brilliant or anything like that. And I think as I sat with them more, and we ended up recording it and hearing it come back, I was like, wow, this is one of the stronger songs on the record. And I just, for whatever reason, had not had it on my radar.
It's always funny, all the songwriters that we've spoken to across the years, that there are times where either being in your head or having that other perspective can sometimes be the glass breaking moment for a song, that it's like, no, this is not what I thought it was. And when someone else gives that other perspective, you're like, oh, okay, I can actually attune to what it is actually trying to say, or click and connect with it's a funny thing how sometimes your own words don't click with you until a certain point where it then aligns and makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I kind of saw it as this little magnetic fields ripoff or something like that. The first couple lines just feel like something that Stephen Merritt would write, and but I oftentimes I would think that those moments usually occur when a producer smells a single, as a song, if you have some kind of cheesy 2-minute song that just kind of yeah, love you kind of songs, and then the producer's like, we got to do that one, and the band's like, oh, And then that becomes the big single, and then the band breaks up because they're upset, they're known for the wrong song or something like that. But in this case, I'm very proud of it. I just feel really fortunate that John was able to, get us to see the forest and the trees.
It's a great song, hence why I wanted to bring it up, and an incredible album, Ben. I think that, fans are going to really connect with I Built You a Tower. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. It is going to be out now when people are going to be listening to this episode, and we will make sure that there are links on where people can buy the vinyl and the merch and tickets to the Australian tour. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask, we usually do kind of end our conversations asking our guests what they're currently listening to. So for yourself, is there anything that's on high rotation or that you kind of want to give a shout out to that you're enjoying at the moment?
Yeah, right now there are two things right now. I just received in the mail the second the American Analog set box set that Numero put out. I sing a song on it. The American Analog set have been friends of ours for a number of years. We met at South by Southwest in 1999, and this is kind of the second box culminating their entire discography. And it's been really wonderful to kind of go back on those records that came out. This second box set spans 2001 to 2007, and just how many incredible songs are on that record. And Andrew Kenny, the songwriter in that band, has been was a huge source of inspiration for me, and I think they're one of those bands that was wildly kind of underappreciated in their time. And I've also been really obsessed with this Japanese group from the 90s called Fishman. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all, but Fishmans with an S, sorry. And they were this interesting kind of Japanese pop group, but they were clearly really obsessed with dub and reggae. So
okay.
So there's just these, a record. If somebody might be interested in checking out, there's a record called King Master George that is this interesting amalgam of some really like dope kind of dubby kind of things, and then just some straight up kind of guitar pop things. And it's all sung in Japanese, but their magnum opus is a record called Long Season, which is just one long piece. It's like a 32 or 34 minute piece that is on my Discogs want list in the number one slot. But the cheapest copies are $600 or something in Japan. But Long Season is just an unbelievably. It's wonderful, and it's very inspiring, and something I'm really enjoying. But yeah, Fishman's and the American Analog set.
I'm definitely across the American Analog set, so we'll definitely check that one out. But I'm very curious to go do a bit of exploring with Fishman's now and have a listen for myself. So that sounds incredible. Ben Gibbard, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast and having a chat with us. As mentioned, the new Death Cab album, I Built You a Tower, is out right now. But Ben, an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was lovely speaking with you.